take a moment to thank our sponsor, CatchMark Technologies. If you're looking for technical support, structured cabling, cybersecurity, or digital marketing, they're your go-to team. With tons of experience, they will guide you through all of your technical problems. Reach out to them at catchmarkit.com.
Oh, man.
All right, welcome to episode, I think we're on number 8 already. It seems like it hasn't been that long in the season yet, but episode number 8. And today we have Dan Hunt from Meraki Performance. Was on last season. For a little bit, we talked a lot about flow state and some other stuff last year.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to be able to pick your brain again today. Appreciate you being able to come on. You actually just got done with your podcast. Tell me a little bit about what you talked about.
Yeah, so we frequently get conversations, especially around this time, especially with fall sports, around building for the next year. You know, and one of the things we talk a lot about, or like the conversations we find ourselves in, is all around character. You know, and I think that a lot of times we look at character as this like inherent. It's always a deficiency. It's always something that's missing. You know, and it's so abstract. How do you build character? You know, And I really try to take the approach of it's what you focus on first, and then you take action on. You know, because if you really try to break character down, a lot of people look at character as like it's a culmination of your habits. It's a culmination of your behaviors, right? If you're somebody that no matter what, when you see somebody, and you're walking out of a gas station, right? You're willing to stay there for a moment and open the door. Like, hey man, you're a kind person. You're a nice person. And it's like, how do you develop that? Well, the more conversations you have on that, the more you focus on that, the more you reward that, the more that's how, then you start taking action on that. Like that's how you build character. And so we take an approach with that of like, how do you identify, okay, if we have areas or character traits that we believe will help us be successful and we don't have, let's name them. Okay, let's start having conversations around them. Let's start seeing and mapping out how they show up in action. Let's start rewarding them. Let's start showing the connections on how when we do these things build to where we want to go, and start building a blueprint or a map of that, you know? And I think it directly goes into the conversation around core values within teams, in helping give focus. But we look at it, I think, a lot of times in these conversations as like this abstract thing, and it's just not. Like you very quickly, if you want to become more hard work, you want to become more disciplined, right? Like let's say at the end of the day, somebody says, I want to become more disciplined. Great. What is discipline? Right? How do you identify, or how do you define it? How would you identify it? And in what areas do you want to be disciplined? And how do you start creating habits and doing different things to exhibit discipline, right? And so like one easy thing is like sticking to something, whether I feel like doing it or not. Okay, great. Let's start making your bed every single day. Whether you feel like it, whether you don't, whether you have time, whatever, let's do it every single day. Right. And over time, if you do that every single day, you're going to realize like, oh, I'm more disciplined. It's like, yeah, you built that character trait. Right. And then you're also going to have confidence in the fact that whether you felt like it or not, you did it anyways. You know what I mean? And so that's a perfect example of, okay, how do you name it? And then how do you go about it? You know? And so that's the approach.
How do you build that in teams necessarily? How do you build that? If you're a coach and you want to make that your culture, how do you build that culture? I guess like how do you make it so that all the people on your team are bought into that?
Yeah. Buy-in's a big thing. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not naive to the fact that especially at the high school level, you're not going to get every single kid that's like, I'm here, I'm in it. Right. And if you do, have fun, man, because that's a blast. You know what I mean? But I'm not naive to the fact that there's going to be kids that are like, they're on the fringe a little bit. They're a little skeptical. You might have to do some inspiration and really trying to tie them in, and they might never get there. You know what I mean? But I think the important thing with coaches is that they're bold enough, and they're bold enough and they're confident enough in who they are that they're willing to explicitly say, this is our program. This is what we believe is important, and this is what we're holding ourselves accountable to. And you see the programs that do that are actually the programs that are consistently successful. You know, you see the programs that ebb and flow and like.
Let's take another moment to thank our sponsor, Shoreline Restoration and Construction. Did a storm recently hit your business, home, or other building? then Shoreline Restoration and Construction can help. They are a leader in remodels, new construction, and much, much more. They also restore water-damaged buildings, flooded basement, and so much more.
I just don't know, and they don't know where they want. Those are the programs that you see ups and downs, and you see, I'll say it because I'm not a coach, but I see it from the outside. You see the parents influence it a ton, right? Parents get mad about a kid not getting playing time, and sure enough, all of a sudden something change. You know what I mean? But the programs that weather the storms and there's a consistency, it's like, hey, this is who we are as a program. This is what I'm going to hold the athletes accountable. This is why we're making decisions, Like, there's clarity of who we are. There's clarity of what we do. And then the kids know where they stand as well. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, all that to say, I think that I would encourage coaches, like, you have to explicitly state that. You have to explicitly state, this is where we're going to land. And I'm a firm believer that when kids buy into that, and they don't have to be the perfect words or the perfect characteristics. The kids have to believe in it, and they have to be tied to where you're trying to go as a program.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Something that I know we talked about the other day was mental toughness in high school athletics, and kind of the degradation of it in the last few years. And I think this is might stir some people up and might make some great conversation, but how do you become mentally tough? Like, what does it take to become mentally tough, right?
Yeah. I think you first have to, like, break it down and look at it and say, what is mental toughness? And that's where I start with. I believe right off the bat that we get it wrong. I think that we get mental toughness wrong a lot of times. I think that it's viewed as, you got to suppress emotion. You got to be stoic. You got to keep hammering and grinding. And I think that's definitely a piece of it. Absolutely. But there's there actually is a stoic philosopher that said the unforeseen punch lands the hardest. All right. And so it's this idea of, what are the things within your life that just pop up that hit you so hard it throws you off your game. All right.
Yeah.
And I think that mentally tough people are self-aware and they don't have unforeseen punches.
Yeah. I think a big part of that, right, is you not necessarily not letting things how do I say this? Not letting things not affect you, and not letting things, or not, I shouldn't say affect, influence you, but not letting them break you, I guess is the way it's so hard to explain. And just not letting it knock you off your rocker, right? Yeah. Like, it's okay to be, if something bad happens in your life, it's okay to be sad. Yep. It's okay to be upset, but not letting it derail everything around you.
Well,
right?
here's the thing with mental toughness. This is how I've typically seen it go about, is like, you can't pay attention to that. Don't feel sad. No, whatever. Like, no, it's weak to be sad, right? Yeah. And then what ends up happening is individuals end up not putting themselves in positions to ever be sad. They don't risk it. They don't challenge themselves. They start avoiding it. And then we go, they're just not mentally tough, right? Well, one of the things I believe with mental toughness is that you're willing to lean into those nasty feelings. And to your point, you don't allow them to throw you off your rocker. And when they do, you go back and you say, let's do this again.
Yeah.
You're not scared of that.
You're not scared of failure, I guess, is the best
100%.
way. And then when you do fail, you say, hey, I messed up, or I did this, or this was not the way it was supposed to be. How can I get better, and how can I move on? Now, my question to you is, how do you influence that as a coach in athletics?
Yeah. I do want to highlight, and I want to talk about that, but I want to highlight the other thing when you talk about failure, right? Yeah. I've asked this of athletes over and over and over again. When you lose the game, you miss the shot, all those things, right? When you talk to them afterwards, it's rarely like, man, that thing was bad. It's always the feeling. It's always like, it just feels so bad, right? Yeah. And I'm highlighting that because it's not always the experience of it happening. It's what they tell themselves and the feelings that drive. Yep. And again, that goes into that mental toughness conversation, is that we're not scared of those feelings. So why is the kid not wanting to make the shot at the end of the game?
Quick break from the action to thank our sponsor. Meraki Performance is a leader in performance coaching. Whether you're looking to motivate your business or your athletic team, Meraki Performance can help. Check them out at MerakiPerform.com.
Well, yeah, they don't want to fail. They don't want the feeling of missing, right? They don't want the feeling of what happened. You know what I mean? They don't want that. And so mental toughness, again, is like being able to lean into that and be able to leverage that and be able to go back to that space and be able to, in those moments, say, like, one, not thinking, right? I'm in that moment. I'm not allowing that thought to pop into my head of what if, okay?
Yeah.
But even when I fail, because I'm going to fail, the evaluation is, okay, who am I? How do I show up here? And how do I use this to keep moving forward? That's mentally tough. It's not running from that.
Yeah.
And I think that one piece that coaches can do this and begin to develop in athletes is being able to have more conversations and evaluating around who we are and where we're going and how to use our experiences for the forward momentum and action to chase down whatever we're chasing down. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think that a lot of times here's a great example is like coaches like, man, I just need my guys to not react on the court. I need them to respond. And it's like, if you watch game film with yourself, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Right? Like how are you displaying that? You know what I mean? And so that's a tough challenge. And I say that with the reality that I need to do that with my own life. I need to do that with my own kids. If I'm telling my own kids, hey, we need to respond, we need to do this, we need to do that, and we're having these conversations about it, right? I need to make sure that I'm being that example. And when I'm not, I have to be mentally tough enough to say, hey, I failed in this.
Yeah.
I'm going to look this thing in the eye and I'm going to work through that. Right.
Yeah.
We're going to work through that, and I think that's a big piece. But I think overall it's grabbing a hold of like, how would they define mental toughness? I know how I define mental toughness. I know how I would look at that. Again, it's leveraging experiences for our benefit. It's being able to, in any situation, stay focused on who we are and what we need to do. Right. Yeah. It's being able to say, recognize, are these feelings leveraging me or am I leveraging them? Yeah. Right. Like to me, that's all a piece of mental toughness. For me, it's saying, hey, I need to take a break. And sometimes I need to keep hammering. Yeah. Right. It's having that self-awareness. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's funny that you say like being locked in at all times, like is part of mental toughness. I think a lot of people don't think about that. Yeah. Like if you go out and you're mentally tough and say you're a basketball player, right? Because that's what I do. That's like the number one thing outside of this. And you're a basketball player and you go into a game and you get fouled, right? Or you think you get fouled and the ref doesn't call it, right? Some guys, that just completely knocks them off the rocker.
100%.
Right? Like that'll shut them down if that happens 2 or 3 times, and then they're mentally out of it, and it's just not a good scene. But a mentally tough person would say, well, I didn't get the call, but there's not really much I can do about it other than say, hey, ref, can you watch this? Right? Sure. And then you just move on. You keep playing, right? Yep. And I think nowadays, I say that like I'm 90, but I think newer generations, younger generations struggle with that more than I think older generations do. Yeah. Or that they did at the same time period.
Well, I think, so let's go back. How do you develop mental toughness in that situation? Yeah. Right. So you have a player that is looking to get the calls, doesn't get the calls, loses their mind, loses their head. Right. And so there's a couple things that are at play there. One, I would even go further and say, and I'm on extreme with this, right? Is like, okay, the ref and their calls and their perspectives are out of my control. Yeah. And so like, I'm going to pay it no attention. I'm going to give it no value. I'm going to drive to the basket, like going. And if I want, like, do I want to draw a foul? Absolutely. But believing like they're not going to call it. So I'm just going to go.
Yeah. That's
right. That's going to be my mindset. And then as a coach, a couple of things I'm doing is when that kid's losing their mind in the moment, you're not doing anything, man. Like you're going to try to get him to breathe. You're going to try to get him to focus on the next play. You're going to try to get him to lock into one action to move them forward. That's it. But then the real growth is afterwards. Yeah. It's like, hey, Connor, what was it that really threw you off? Like, what was the belief behind it? Oh, and it might be, man, that ref never gives me calls. Well, how does that thought, whether it's true or not, who cares? Yeah. How does that thought help you be at your best? When you have that thought, one, it's out of your control. Okay, we agree. Yep. Mm-hmm. But 2, when you have that thought and it drives the emotion that it did, were you at your best? No. Do you want to be at your best? Yeah. Okay, let's do something different. So when that thought pops in your mind, you get that feeling, what can we think on and shift our focus on?
So here's an even more deep question. You say you do that, right? You after the game, you ask the player that, and you have that conversation. How do you get the player to take that and actually work with it? You know what I mean? Like, especially, you might have a team that's super growth minded and wants to do that and wants you to say that. And then you might have a team that's not super open to that.
Yeah.
How, as a coach, do you handle that? I guess is like, just from your point of view.
Yeah. So there is a desire piece, right? There's like, they have.
At this moment, we'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. Chris Wink, Century 21 First Class Realty. Looking to sell or purchase a new home? Or perhaps invest in a plot of land? Chris Wink with Century 21 First Class Realty is your go-to expert. As a leader in West Michigan real estate, Chris brings unparalleled knowledge and dedication to every transaction. Don't wait. Call Chris Wink today at 616-414-5420 and take the first step towards your real estate dreams. Century 21 First Class Realty, your trusted partner in West Michigan property.
Desire this thing, and some of that is finding out what's the external motivation. What is their reasoning? And a lot of people, it's recognition. It's not even for a lot of kids, it's not even winning. There's a lot of kids that want to win. There's a lot of kids that want the recognition and validation or the perspective that other people see them as winners. That's what matters more. You know what I mean? And so it's understanding what's the external motivation, but what's the internal inspiration. And I think this was part of our conversation last time around education too, is like, how are we cultivating and recognizing the internal drivers and then firing that, right? And so I think some of it is, and coaches are doing their best trying to get to know the players. And some of it is that you're teaching players how to open up and actually be open enough to explore this a little bit. Because I don't know if kids are great at this right now. I know like it takes a lot of conversations and different questions and opening up and clarifying questions and, a lot of rapport building before I can get with an athlete to a point of like, oh, this is the internal driver and these are the external drivers.
I think it's funny because I think it's almost generational. When you look at like, maybe the 90s, 80s, and players back then, the trust in an adult. I think you can look across the board in anything. The trust in just like, hey, you're an adult, so I'm just going to trust you because you're automatically an adult. Was much higher. The rapport, you didn't need a ton of rapport to reach these kids, whereas now they're second guessing everything, right? And in order, you have to make a bunch of I wouldn't say bunch of, but you have to gain the trust over time. It takes longer amounts of time to be able to gain a trust with an athlete now versus how it was in the 90s and 80s, right?
Yeah.
Like kids go out there and don't just trust you.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of time to build that. Whereas back then it was just kind of like, hey, we'll trust you because you've done this and this and this and this. And I think it stems from a lot of people, kids now are just used to a lot of people, adults in a way, being kind of, I guess you could say fake, where it's a mask, right? And so they're seeing through, they're trying to see through it constantly. And they have to, I think that's why Dan Campbell's been so successful with Detroit, is because Detroit for a long time had just guys with masks on all the time. And Dan Campbell came in there and he's a real dude. Like the guy you see on the field is the same guy you see in the locker room at all times. And that's the type of person that's going to be really successful in sports nowadays.
Yeah. And I would say what you're highlighting is that the environment and landscape has changed.
Yeah.
But what's still true is everybody has external motivators and everybody has internal. And that's where I think coaches can lean in and navigate that.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of things at play, but one of the things I really try to go back to is at the end of the day, it's our reality.
Yeah.
And so I see a lot of coaches having that conversation. I think those conversations are healthy because at times it can help us dig into different things and maybe shift a different perspective. But at the end of the day, that's not changing the landscape.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it's still leaning in and saying, if individual athletes are having a harder time identifying and clarifying that because there is so much noise everywhere, right? How do we help them in that noise figure out what's that internal and external motivator?
Yeah.
And really what it is for them. I might have shared this on a podcast before, but an individual athlete that was working with the team, and we were in a team session and we were talking through some things, and we were talking about how, anger, right? And how anger can be a motivator for a moment, but typically if left unchecked, if it gets into rage, okay, it gets uncontrollable and it leverages you.
Yep.
Right. And I think that at times getting mad we've all felt that. You get that focus, you get that drive. It's like that boost. But then if you don't like almost taper it out and get into the flow or get into the moment and you let that continue to be a driver, it drains you and it leverages you. Right.
Yeah.
And we've all felt that before where we start making stupid decisions. We all of a sudden we're tired, like we're not in it anymore. And so this individual's like, no, like I always play better angry. We're like, oh, okay, like where does that belief come from? And where's the evidence of that?
Or is it really anger?
Right. Well, what we identified was it was anger. And it turned into uncontrolled rage. And this individual would typically foul late in a game and put us in a bad position.
Yeah.
Right. And the belief was, well, my dad always said so. My dad always said I played better angry. My dad always said, and so the belief was, I'm doing this because my dad said, and I'm being valid. Like I'm seeking my dad's validation for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And really the evidence was, no, you actually put yourself in a bad position and us in a bad position late in the game.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so once we unpacked that a little bit and identified, okay, what do you believe now? Right? What is your experience? It was like, okay, like when I get angry, if it prolongs or I let it go unchecked or it becomes rage, I don't make the best decisions. Like, okay, now what do we do with that? Right. And that player ended up becoming mentally tougher in that process because, again, that's not the unforeseen punch. What would happen? They'd get angry, it turned to rage, then they would commit the foul, and then it was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Right? It's like, yeah, now they see that, and now it's not the unforeseen punch anymore.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on. This is a great conversation. If the people who are watching, if you want to see more of what Dan has to talk about, check out his Heads or Tails podcast. He just had one right before this. It's live once a month. Second Wednesday is the goal. For every month, and he talks a lot about these topics. Right, dives into them, and it's great. Like anybody who's struggling as a coach or as a player, check out what he has to say. It's I know. It might seem stupid, but I play a lot of basketball and I do a lot of other sports. And some of the things that you've said, I've thought about while on the basketball court while coaching and has impacted my performance. Right. So really check it out, dive deep into it. And check out his website, MerakiPerform.com.
Yeah. And I would just say too, even if you're not struggling, if you just want to take it to the next level, you know what I mean? And there's endless combinations, and that's what we're trying to do is just help you unlock.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on. Awesome episode, short and sweet.
Yeah, appreciate it.
And thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
At this moment, we would like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. Park Place Sports. Want to support your local athletics program? Look no further than Park Place Sports. As a leader in banner and sponsorship program for athletes, they provide top-notch services to help your team shine. Visit their Facebook page, Park Place Sports, LLC, and see how they can elevate your athletic program today. Park Place Sports, your partner in athletic excellence.